For this online module, we will be going over Chapter 2 and 3 of your text, Food for Change, and we'll start off with Chapter 2. This is going to discuss farming and its values, which I think is a great place to start, because if you're looking at food and food initiatives, everything's going to start with the farmer. So with this text, we're going to be describing the lives and ambitions of 4 groups of farmers. 3 of them are going to be from Mediterranean Europe, and 1 is going to be from England. They all have very different personal histories. Some were born in independent farming families, while some are first-generation farmers who just left their towns or their cities. But what they share is the energy that they put into 2 strategies. 1 is growing food, which is going to have distinctive qualities, such as local specialties or organic vegetables. And that way, the food is going to be identified by the way it's produced. So how, where, or by whom. The second is finding ways to sell directly to consumers. And this is a crucial way of increasing the financial reward of their labor. These 2 strategies are linked. In fact, the way that the food is sold can be part of what makes it special. In all cases, there has to be a match between what is produced and what consumers will buy. So we need to understand both the ambitions of farmers and what their customers want from the food that they eat. And how about you take a moment to reflect on what you want from the food that you're buying? Is it just calories to survive? Is it taste? Are you concerned over food additives? Do you want to know who made your food and how far it had to travel? How can we address all of our concerns and still reward the farmer for his labor? Because I am sure we would all love cheap food that is healthy and tasty. So how can we accomplish this with our current market? So with these 2 chapters, we will look at open and closed food systems, food policies, the culture surrounding our food production and consumption, and the rise of more sustainable practices. So, again, we are focusing on these farming strategies, so growing food with distinctive qualities, and trying to find ways to beat out the middleman and sell directly to our consumers. Now, European history, the countryside has been associated with autonomy. So, providing its own labor and resources. Economic productivity was dominated by the production of what was immediately needed. The farmers who figure in this book are almost all opposed to high-tech, high-energy industrial modes of farming. And they really don't think that it represents progress. They associate all of this technology with a loss of food quality, with a loss of skill, livelihoods, and that autonomy, that freedom. So what is their problem? Well, statistics reveal that we have a dramatic decline in the numbers of farmers in Europe. And of course, this is not just a European problem. We see the same issues here in the United States. The most dramatic falls, though, have been in the decades following the Second World War. But even if you look at between 2000 and 2010, Europe lost a quarter of its agricultural labor force. And while, yes, this does include managers and anybody that's really employed in farming, within this group, the hardest hit has been the small farmers. And that's because they've been squeezed out of a living. So there's really going to be 3 main processes at work here that are contributing to this problem. The first is the industrialization of agriculture. There's been a dramatic technological revolution in farming practices. And, at the core of this, we're replacing our farm labor. We're using more machinery. We're using more chemicals, pesticides, herbicides to control crop loss, and more biotechnology for plant breeding. The effect of this has been really the loss of positions and the loss of natural processes and variations in our farming. Another consequence is that this is a very energy-intensive form of farming. It's dependent on diesel oil for its machinery and natural gas and oil for its productivity. This is the central fact in arguments about the sustainability of industrial agriculture. So if we look at the second process leading to some of these issues that we're seeing with our farmers, it's also a very highly competitive environment. They're having to compete with other farmers in other European unions. And they're also having to compete with other people worldwide for cheap food that provides that variety. So the third process that's going to really affect this takeover is the supermarket chains. And a good example of this is in Britain, 3/4 of the food bought is really going to be sold by only 900,000 employees. Now, this is not that great of a figure, but if you look at the world's largest groups like Walmart and Tesco, they are all global players. So what is the result of all three of these problems? Well, the result is cheap food. So what are the effects of the cheap food? Well, all of these revolutions are producing cheap food for their consumer. And what we see is that most of us are spending less than 10% of our income on food. But cheap food has many costs. Some of them are environmental, like the destruction of mangrove swamps in Vietnam for prawns, the land cleared in Brazil to plant soy to keep meat prices low, and of course the continuing saga of misused toxic pesticides. Other costs include humans. So since the food industry has some of the worst pay and conditions of any part of our economy, workers are poorly paid, they're ununionized, and they rely on short-term contracts. So these environmental and human costs are external to the corporations operating in the food chain and are not paid directly by the individual consumer. But sooner or later, the bill does have to be picked up somewhere else in the economy. So let's briefly talk about our food systems. So the struggles of small farmers reveal a dynamic tension between two modes of economic activity. You have a closed system and an open system. One aims at relative closure to keep the fruits of labor and creativity, the goods and resources it generates within the bounds of those who produce them. So it could be the household, the farm, or locality. Closed systems have corresponding economic virtues and values. So thrift, self-sufficiency, and autonomy. Open systems are based on the expansion of trade and technological innovation, accumulation, and the ever-widening circulation of goods. So with the open system, an entrepreneur assembles everything that's needed for production: the capital, the labor, the land, the materials, the technology, and it's from wherever you can get it the cheapest. Thus, this is going to widen the circuit's potential for lowering their costs. Can we escape this? Well, we can see that there's many ways to escape the fierce competition of mainstream food chains and be more independent. So you could minimize the purchase of industrial inputs, you could sell direct, you could establish exchange networks. But we have another form that could have unintended consequences. And this is the attempt to increase income by selling food at a higher price because it's better or different from the mainstream. And I think all of us have probably experienced this. We go to a food market and there's this organic beet that was, grown 2 miles away, but it's going to cost you $10 for that beet. So obviously we want to support the farmer, but once you start to see this niche of more local and organic produce, it also opens up the door for more commercial operators who can move into the areas and then capture that opportunity. Now, one way that they fought this off is with certification. And so they have, regulatory bodies that are going to have certain criteria that these farmers have to meet in order to say that this is, a certain kind of wine from a certain region. So a good example would be the DOC system. And this is used in the wine industries of France, Italy, and Spain. So in each case, this only happens, though, when you have consolidated economic interests. You have to have the local chambers of commerce and the like to invest in this type of project. And another issue then that you have with this certification is it allows the movement of these goods outside of the local industry, and it opens up the doors for a more open system. I'm sure that, everybody here in Georgia would love to have some Montepulciano wine. And, you can see that it's DOC or DOCG, and you know that it has that high quality. So while we can provide these certifications to ensure the authenticity of the local food, it also opens up the door for more open systems.